Howdy, folks. I hope you're all doing well today on a Monday. As I record this, it's a special Monday because it's the Monday of Holy Week, a week where we get to sit and reflect on the journey that Jesus took to the cross, a day where we celebrate that on Friday, Good Friday, and celebrate his resurrection on Easter Sunday. What I'd like to do this week, and if you're willing to hang on and listen to some of these messages, is give you a brief reflection each day as we get to that point. We're sitting in isolation in many cases, stuck at home, and I just ask that you might take some time to listen to these and to reflect on what it is that Jesus did and did for each one of us as we work our way towards Easter. Let me read to you from our first reading, which is from John chapter 12, verses 1 to 11. John chapter 12, verses 1 to 11. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus arrived at Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honour. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about half a litre of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair, and the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected. Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put in it. Leave her alone, Jesus replied. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the chief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well, for on account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and putting their faith in him. The gospel story for today, our reading, is very famous in the early church. And we find there's 4 accounts of the same story recorded in each of the 4 gospels. And they're all slightly different. But you can sense that it's the same story. And there seems to be 2 different versions of it. One in the synoptic gospels and one in this story, the story from John. The structure of the story is basically the same, but the details seem to be different. It's a story of a woman in a home near Jerusalem at Jesus' last week, just before his death, wetting his feet with her tears, taking a jar of enormously expensive perfume and lovingly anointing his feet with that oil to prepare his body for burial. And there was someone present that tried to spoil her gift by suggesting that she give it to the poor. And in this version, from the book of John, we hear that the woman was named Mary, and she was a sister of Martha and Lazarus. We know this family of Mary, Martha and Lazarus from other stories in the Bible. We know the Mary and Martha story, don't we? How Martha was so busy in the kitchen preparing for a special guest, Jesus, and how her sister Mary sat out in the living room, kneeling and listening to his words of wisdom. And in that story, Jesus challenged Martha for her activity and busyness in the kitchen and praised Mary that she had chosen the better part of sitting at the feet of Jesus and listening to him. In the story we have for today, we see the same pattern continuing. Jesus had once again come to that house in Bethany, and Martha was busy preparing the evening dinner. She then served Jesus, her brother, and her sister. I think we need to put in a good word for the Marthas of this life, who do a lot of the work, who prepare a lot of the meals, who do so much in their house and around them. We often put the Marthas down as being unspiritual, but they're very spiritual. They know exactly what they need to do and they do it. And I've got to say, without people that are acting like Marthas in this world, we wouldn't get much done around the place. And the second person we meet in John's version of the story is Lazarus. the brother of Mary and Martha. In the previous chapter, chapter 11, Lazarus has been raised from the dead. The whole of chapter 11 on John focuses on the raising of Lazarus from the dead. An amazing story. And you've heard that Jesus and Lazarus were deepest friends, that Jesus' grief was emotional and profound, that Jesus wept not with a few tears, but cried with what we would call ugly crying these days. When Jesus raised his good friend Lazarus from the dead, the crowds began to follow Jesus even more, and the Pharisees who plotted Jesus' death even began plotting to do away with Lazarus. Evidence of Jesus' deity. But neither Martha nor Lazarus are at the centre of this story for today. At the centre of this memorable story is Mary. And as we focus on Mary, she's the listener, the emotional one, the sensitive soul. Mary, who was prone to tears. Mary took a jar of expensive perfume, valued at a year's wages. It was expensive, no matter which way you look at it, in that time or this time, a year's wages. She fell at Jesus' feet as if she knew something that other people didn't realise, as if she knew that this man was soon to die. She sensed in that moment that she wanted to do something really special for Jesus. So in a radical departure from appropriate custom, she let her hair down, her hair that had been tightly braided around her head, and she again started to weep. The Gospel of Luke tells us that she wet his feet with her tears, wiped his feet with her hair, kissed his feet, and then anointed them with expensive perfume. It was a most loving and tender gesture, so intimate, almost too intimate, making everyone in the room feel really uncomfortable. She was doing the right thing towards Jesus at the right moment. In this account of the life of Jesus, we are invited to love Jesus the same way. We sense that Mary was giving her very best to Jesus, her most sacred possession, and that we too are to give our very best to Jesus in a relationship of mutual love. Mary knew the degree of Jesus' forgiveness for her imperfections and was deeply appreciative of Jesus for the magnitude of his forgiveness to her. And there are many of us that feel the same way. We all know, we sense that deepness of our own sinfulness, and we feel like it's way too much. We feel that we've been too wayward, too excessive in our sinning and our imperfections. And so we can be deeply touched because of his forgiveness towards us. We can understand this woman's feelings towards Jesus and his abundant forgiveness because we feel the same way. We look at Judas, the person who ruins the mood of this most tender moment and self-righteously declares the perfume was hugely expensive, a year of labour. It should have been sold and given to the poor. We have to wonder, why was it that Judas was in charge of the money that Jesus had and the disciples, the money of Jesus and the disciples? Was it because this was Judas's special talent? Was it his special gift to keep track of money and to pay all the bills? And if it was, it's just another example of where a person who is talented or gifted in one aspect of their life, who ever so slowly, there's a transformation in that inner person where that gift from God becomes twisted and distorted. And we end up abusing the gift that God has given us. This could be well what happened to Judas. The power of evil got into his heart and he began abusing the primary gifts that God had given him. And that can happen to us all as well, in our own specific situations. We too have been given particular talents and abilities, and we too can go through an inner malformation and abuse the gifts that God has given us. The last person who is part of the story for today was Jesus himself. Jesus defended this woman. Jesus said to leave her alone, that her special affection for him was good and appropriate. He said that she was preparing him for burial, for his death, for his crucifixion on the cross. Jesus loved her giving of herself to him in an extravagant way. And Jesus also loves it when we give ourselves to him, as the woman did. The whole point of this story is that Jesus loved what the woman did. Not because she wet his feet with tears or dried them with her hair or anointed his feet with expensive perfume. But because of all these simple gestures, they were symbols that she truly loved him in a deep, deep personal way. And Jesus wants us to love him the same. Can our lives be so deeply touched by the living Jesus that we want to respond in some special way? Can our lives be so deeply forgiven by Christ that we want to respond in an unusual, meaningful way? Many of us who profess to be Christians, we do. Each of us, having been deeply touched by Jesus, want to respond to him and give our best lives to him in such a way that we know that Christ knows that we love him and that we appreciate all that he has done for us. That's what we want, but not always what we do. How often are we like Judas? Judas did love Jesus, but he got distracted at some point. And as we head towards Easter Sunday, let's not get distracted this week. Let's take the opportunity to not be distracted. Let's take the opportunity to understand the incredibly special gift that Jesus gave us, gave all of us. Let's remember what Mary did and do the same. Let's love Jesus extravagantly. Until next time.